Jasmine Crockett walked onto the stage with quiet determination as the audience clapped, their cheers slowly fading when they noticed she wasn't smiling like most guests do. The lights hit her sharp but steady expression while DeGeneres turned in her seat with her usual bright welcome. But Jasmine didn't wait for a question or an opening joke. She simply sat down, placed her hands on her knees, and looked directly at Ellen without blinking. It wasn't confrontation, it wasn't drama, it was something deeper and heavier, and the audience didn't know yet whether to lean in or hold their breath. Ellen gave her a warm nod and opened with that familiar voice the crowd trusted, saying it was great to have Jasmine here, that it's been a wild ride watching her speak out and stir up conversations in politics and beyond, and asked her what brought her to the show today. Jasmine didn't hesitate or shift in her seat like most people do. She looked at Ellen and then at the audience, and she spoke in a slow, even voice that didn't need to rise to feel powerful. She said she came because there are things that need to be said on platforms where people actually listen, not just echo chambers or quiet corners where the truth goes to die. She said she's tired of people smiling through injustice and pretending kindness is enough when there are millions who haven't felt safe or seen in years. She said she didn't come to entertain, she came to shake something loose. The energy in the studio started to shift as Ellen adjusted in her seat and smiled a little tighter than before, saying that's a strong way to start, but that's what this show is about, giving voices to people who matter. Jasmine nodded slowly and said she respected that, but respect doesn't mean silence, and she wasn't going to water anything down. The room got quieter. Some people in the crowd leaned forward, others sat still, but all of them were focused now in a way they hadn't expected when the taping started. Ellen said people admire Jasmine's courage and asked if it ever gets overwhelming, carrying all that pressure, knowing the backlash that comes from being so direct. Jasmine's answer wasn't dramatic or emotional, it was clear and stripped of decoration. She said pressure was real, but it doesn't compare to what people in forgotten towns and broken systems carry every day without a mic or a platform or even hope. She said she'd rather absorb 10 storms than play nice while others drown silently. There were no claps after that line, just stillness. Jasmine looked at Ellen and told her that shows like this one had the power to do more than uplift and entertain, that they could tell the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, especially when it was uncomfortable. Ellen was quiet for a beat and then said maybe it was time they leaned into that a little more. Jasmine nodded again, calm but firm, and said leaning isn't enough, it's time to stand. That was the moment when something changed in the air, not because of shouting or conflict, but because someone came in and refused to play the part people expected, and everyone watching could feel that this conversation wasn't just going to be another feel-good segment. It was going to matter. Jasmine Crockett stood still for a second as the murmur of the audience faded into an eerie hush. Her gaze locked on Ellen's shifting expression like a predator studying movement in grass. And instead of shrinking back under the pressure of national television, she leaned in with eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 headlines and a voice sharpened by years of being underestimated, her words slicing through the tension like a blade drawn with precision and purpose. So when exactly did speaking truth become offensive? Or is it just when the truth makes certain people uncomfortable on their own stage? And just like that, the audience gasped again. But this time there was no laughter, only the shifting of bodies in their seats as the energy in the room turned electric, crackling with something more dangerous than controversy. It was truth set on fire. Ellen blinked twice, her familiar smile faltering as she opened her mouth to regain control. But Jasmine didn't wait. She pushed forward not physically, but with the sheer momentum of what she carried inside, pointing calmly but firmly toward the studio lights as if they were court exhibits. This is the kind of setting where people like me are supposed to play nice, sit cute, and smile wide while being talked down to with passive jabs wrapped in pleasantries. But I didn't come here to perform. I came here to speak, and now the silence deepened because the audience didn't know whether to clap or hold their breath, and Ellen still hadn't found her next move because Jasmine's rhythm was growing louder with every beat. She turned slightly to the crowd, as if inviting them into the reality behind her words, her voice now steadier than before. Let's not pretend that inviting a black congresswoman on stage just to mock her passion for justice is progressive or humorous or edgy. It's lazy. It's outdated. And it's everything we've been calling out for decades. And someone in the crowd finally broke the tension with a slow clap. One that was joined quickly by another, then another, until the wave built into something impossible to ignore. A low roar of approval that didn't come from fans of spectacle, but from people who saw a moment they never expected to witness live. Ellen raised her hands, trying to cool things down with a light chuckle, attempting to turn the temperature back to something manageable. But Jasmine wasn't retreating. Her voice rose again, not in volume, but in force, carrying a new clarity. If I speak passionately about injustice, I'm called aggressive. If I don't speak, I'm complicit. If I make people laugh, I'm invited back. But if I make people think I'm too much, so I'll take too much. I'll take all of it, because this moment is not about your brand, it's about what's real. And now even the producers in the control room were hesitating, unsure whether to cut to commercial or lean in and capture every second. Ellen tried again, this time reaching for charm. Her tone soft and deliberate. Jasmine, I just wanted to bring some humor to the conversation. No offense meant truly. And Jasmine nodded slowly, not with agreement, but understanding the game. Stepping closer with a calmness that felt heavier than rage. Humor is fine, Ellen, but not when it punches down. Not when it covers pain with jokes that only some people get to laugh at. Not when it avoids accountability by hiding behind applause signs and edited segments. Because I didn't come here to laugh. I came here to bring what your writers couldn't script. By now the room had fully changed. The crowd leaning forward as if their own bodies could tip the balance of the moment. And Ellen's silence was telling enough. Her eyes wide but unsure whether to interrupt again or let it finish. And Jasmine, without waiting for a cue, simply stepped back once and ended it with a line that echoed like thunder wrapped in velvet. Invite me next time when you want a real conversation, not just a headline. And with that, she sat down slowly, folding her hands like nothing happened while the cameras stayed fixed on Ellen, whose face couldn't hide the shock anymore, because she hadn't expected her own platform to become the stage where she got exposed. And in the seconds that followed, before the next joke, before the cutaway, before the credits, there was something almost holy about the silence that held the room. Something raw and unscripted and unforgettable. Jasmine Crockett could feel the pulse of the room as Ellen DeGeneres stumbled over her words, trying to claw her way back from the devastation of that final remark. It wasn't the kind of damage you could simply smooth over with a smile or a laugh. This was something deeper, something raw, and Jasmine knew it. She had thrown the gauntlet down, and now the studio was holding its breath, unsure whether they should be shocked or impressed by her refusal to conform. As Ellen recovered her composure, she quickly flashed a smile and made a weak attempt to regain control of the show. Well, that was certainly unexpected, but Jasmine wasn't about to let the moment slip away. Not this time, not on her terms. Jasmine's eyes locked onto Ellen's, piercing through the television host's usual bravado with a sharpness that made Ellen visibly flinch. The audience was captivated, the tension thick, as Jasmine leaned forward ever so slightly, her words now a steady stream of truth cutting through the noise of the fake, the shallow, and the performative. It's funny, Jasmine began, her voice low but unwavering, how the people who benefit most from the system are the quickest to laugh it off when someone challenges them. You're all for inclusivity until it's inconvenient for you. The words hung in the air, reverberating off the studio walls. And the uncomfortable silence that followed wasn't something Ellen could break so easily. The audience shifted, their seats creaking under the weight of their uncertainty. Jasmine was speaking to them now, not just to Ellen, her voice echoing through the room as if the words were meant for something more than just a television appearance. She was speaking to anyone who had ever been told to sit down, shut up, or smile pretty while their life was reduced to a soundbite or a meme. You think this is about a joke, Ellen. It's not. It's about power. It's about the people who've been pushed down for too long, who get told their stories are too much for primetime television. Jasmine paused for a beat, letting the words settle into the room. She could feel the shift in the energy. It wasn't the usual forced applause she was used to hearing after a punchline. This time, it was genuine, born from a place of discomfort and realization. Ellen, who had once held the reins of every conversation, now found herself struggling to keep up, her usual charm and wit rendered ineffective against the truth bomb that had just been dropped. The smile that had been plastered across her face was now a mere facade, one that couldn't mask the discomfort she was feeling. Jasmine could see it all. The internal wheels turning, the mental gymnastics trying to formulate an answer that would somehow deflect the reality of what had just been said. But Jasmine wasn't waiting for her to catch up. She wasn't playing this game on Ellen's terms. "You know," Jasmine continued, her tone growing colder, sharper, "I didn't come here to dance around your talk show games. I came here to make a statement, a real one. A statement that doesn't fit into the neat little box you've built around acceptable conversations." The studio lights seemed to grow hotter with every passing second, and Jasmine's every word carried the weight of years of frustration, of the countless women and people of color who had been told to sit in the back and smile while the world moved on without them. And Ellen, who had built an empire on being the approachable, likable host, suddenly found herself on the wrong side of history. "You think you know what it's like to fight, Ellen? You think you understand what it's like to have to claw your way to the table just to get a seat? No, you don't. But here's the thing, you're not going to be the one to write this story anymore," Jasmine said, her words piercing through the air like a blade cutting through fabric. The audience, who had once been unsure, now erupted into applause, the sound deafening in its intensity. This wasn't the applause for a performer. This wasn't the applause for someone doing their job on a talk show. This was the applause for someone speaking truth, someone demanding the respect that was so often denied. Ellen, for all her charm, was no longer the star of this moment. Jasmine Crockett had stolen the spotlight, and she wasn't going to give it back. Ellen's attempt to steer the conversation back to her familiar ground was laughable at best. "Well, that was quite the moment, Jasmine," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "But you know, we're all just here to have some fun and share some laughs." But Jasmine wasn't having any of it. She wasn't here to appease the audience with polite chatter. "Fun," Jasmine repeated slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Fun is easy when you're not the one carrying the weight of history on your back. Fun is easy when you can afford to laugh at the expense of others. But I'm not here for your brand of fun. I'm here for something real, something meaningful." There was no backing down now. Jasmine had thrown down the gauntlet, and she wasn't going to let Ellen's deflections erase what had just transpired. Ellen, for all her years of playing the friendly host, couldn't undo the damage that had been done to her reputation in that single moment. She couldn't laugh it off. She couldn't charm her way out of this one. The reality was too stark, too raw. Jasmine Crockett had just delivered a masterclass in truth, and there was no going back from that. The room, now vibrating with the energy of the crowd's approval, seemed to close in on both women. Ellen, her usually perfect composure now rattled, opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. It was as though everything she had ever known about conducting an interview, about controlling the narrative, had been shattered in an instant. And Jasmine, standing tall with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she had just won, took a breath, allowing the silence to speak louder than any applause or scripted response ever could. The audience knew, the world watching knew. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone awry. This was a moment that had changed everything. And as Jasmine Crockett made her final remark, her voice calm but full of conviction, she sealed her place in the history of talk show television. "You asked for this, Ellen. You wanted to bring me on here so I could be your token progressive. But the truth is, you've underestimated me from the start. This isn't your platform. It's mine. And I'm taking it." With that, she stood up, her chair scraping across the floor as she turned toward the exit. The audience erupted into applause once more, louder, more fervent, as Jasmine Crockett walked off the set of the Ellen DeGeneres show, leaving behind a stunned and speechless Ellen, who had no idea what had just hit her. The room buzzed with energy, the crowd alive with a mixture of admiration and awe. What had started as another mundane celebrity appearance had just transformed into a seismic event in talk show history. The tension in the studio was palpable. Jasmine Crockett had just delivered her lethal line, and the energy in the room seemed to shift in a way no one could have predicted. For the first time in the history of the Ellen DeGeneres show, the audience wasn't waiting for a joke or a comedic punchline. They were waiting for the next move. Ellen, who had prided herself on her ability to control the flow of any conversation, was now utterly lost for words. Her usual quick-witted comebacks were nowhere to be found. The studio, typically filled with the hum of banter and chatter, had gone eerily quiet. Jasmine stood in the center of it all, her posture strong and her eyes unwavering. She wasn't just defending herself or making a point for the sake of the show. No, this was something much more profound. She was standing up for every voice that had ever been silenced. For every person who had been told their opinion didn't matter, their story wasn't worth hearing, or their experiences weren't valid because they didn't fit into the neat little box that mainstream television loved to package and sell. As the seconds ticked by, Ellen's expression shifted from a forced smile to a tight-lipped grimace. She wasn't used to this. For years, she had prided herself on being the host with the charm, the one who could diffuse any awkward moment with a quick joke and an even quicker comeback. But Jasmine was different. Jasmine was cutting through the noise with something Ellen couldn't fight: the truth. There was a beat of silence, a long, uncomfortable silence. Ellen shifted in her seat, the familiar weight of the spotlight now feeling more like a burden than a badge of honor. She had tried to lead the conversation, to make Jasmine the punchline of a joke, but Jasmine had flipped the script. And now, it was Ellen who found herself on the defensive, desperately grasping for something, anything, to salvage what little dignity she had left in this exchange. "Well, Jasmine," Ellen finally said, trying to muster up her usual charm, "I guess I wasn't expecting that." The words felt hollow as they left her lips. Jasmine, without skipping a beat, leaned in just slightly, her voice cutting through the air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "I didn't expect you to understand," Jasmine replied, her tone deliberate and calm, though her words held a quiet intensity that felt like a storm building. "You never had to. You were never the one being told your voice doesn't matter. You were never told that your fight wasn't worth it." Ellen's face reddened. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the realization that for the first time in her career, she wasn't in control. The studio, once a place where Ellen had always been able to steer the narrative, now felt foreign to her. The audience, once her captive, was now leaning in, hanging on every word that came from Jasmine's mouth. And Ellen couldn't stop it. Jasmine wasn't done. She hadn't even come close to making her point, and Ellen was quickly realizing that the more she tried to steer the conversation back to familiar ground, the deeper Jasmine would dig. "You know," Jasmine continued, her voice still smooth but growing with quiet power, "you've built your whole career on being the voice of the marginalized. But how often do you actually let us speak? You love to champion causes, but you don't want to hear the full truth. You don't want to hear about the sacrifices, the pain, the rage, the exhaustion. You want it packaged neatly for the viewers, something they can consume without having to confront their own complicity in the system that keeps us silent." The words hit like a freight train, each one carefully calculated and delivered with surgical precision. The audience, who had once thought of Ellen as their dear friend, now began to see her in a new light. There was no denying the discomfort that had taken over her usually confident demeanor. Jasmine wasn't just challenging her words. She was questioning everything Ellen had built. She was tearing down the image of the fun-loving, inclusive, everybody's friend persona that had made Ellen an icon. And still, Ellen struggled to respond. "I think we've gotten a bit off track here," Ellen attempted, her voice cracking ever so slightly. This was supposed to be a light-hearted conversation, but Jasmine wasn't having it. "It was never about being light-hearted, Ellen," she shot back, her tone steady but firm. "It was about using your platform to actually give people a voice, not just giving them what's comfortable for the audience to consume. I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to make sure you hear what I have to say." The studio was electric now, alive with an energy that came from something real. The audience wasn't clapping or laughing, but they were listening in a way they hadn't in a long time. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was an actual conversation, uncomfortable as it might be, about the real issues that were often pushed to the sidelines in favor of entertainment. Jasmine wasn't speaking to a camera or to an audience. She was speaking to everyone who had been ignored, dismissed, or oppressed. Ellen sat back in her chair, visibly defeated for the first time in years. She had tried to control the conversation, but Jasmine had taken the reins, and there was no going back. The tables had turned, and now it was Ellen who was struggling to keep up, to find the right words to even begin to respond. She had spent so much of her career being the one who dictated the narrative, but in this moment, Jasmine had shown her just how fragile that power could be. The audience, still silent, was clearly divided. Some looked at Jasmine with newfound respect, nodding as they absorbed her words. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react to the rawness of the moment. But no one could deny the truth of what Jasmine had said. It was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a celebrity making a statement. This was someone who had lived the experience she was talking about, someone who had been forced to fight every step of the way for a seat at the table. And Ellen, despite her years of experience in the industry, found herself realizing something she had never truly considered before. Maybe she wasn't the only one with a story to tell. Maybe it wasn't just about what she could do for the people she had uplifted on her show. It was about letting them speak for themselves. The silence in the room felt like a massive weight, pressing down on both women. Ellen, still trying to regain her composure, let out a slow, shaky breath. She wasn't sure what came next. The interview had taken a turn she hadn't expected, and in many ways, it was clear that this was a turning point for both of them. But it wasn't over yet. Jasmine wasn't done yet, and Ellen knew that if she didn't say something now, she would lose the last ounce of control she had left in the conversation. "Well," Ellen said after what felt like an eternity, "I think we've definitely had a lot to think about here today." Her words were weak, but they were all she could muster in that moment. Jasmine's eyes remained locked on Ellen's, her stance unyielding as she prepared to make her final point, to leave the audience with something they wouldn't soon forget. Jasmine took a slow, deliberate step forward, her eyes still locked onto Ellen's. The tension in the room was thicker than ever, but this time, Jasmine wasn't concerned with winning the argument. She wasn't looking for approval. She wasn't looking for validation. She was done trying to please anyone. It wasn't about that anymore. She had made her point loud and clear, and now, all that was left was for the world to hear it. Ellen, on the other hand, was running out of options. She had hoped that the awkward silence would somehow dissipate, that she could regain control of the conversation by shifting it back to something lighter, something more palatable for the audience. But Jasmine wasn't going to give her that easy way out. She had proven her point, and Ellen could either admit it or keep digging herself deeper. The lights overhead seemed to flicker for a brief moment, almost as if the studio itself was caught in the thick silence, unsure of what was happening. Jasmine's voice broke the stillness once more, but this time, there was no malice in it, only the sharp sting of truth. "I'm not here to make you feel bad, Ellen," Jasmine said softly, but with undeniable power in her words. "I'm not here to tear you down either. But you need to understand that sometimes, being in a position like yours means you have to carry the weight of other people's voices too. It's not just about entertaining or making people comfortable. It's about giving space for the stories that need to be told. You don't have to be perfect, but you do need to be real. And sometimes, being real means listening when you don't want to. It means stepping back and letting others take the spotlight, even if that means you lose some of yours. The audience, who had been on the edge of their seats, was now utterly captivated. It wasn't just the sharpness of Jasmine's words that left them stunned. It was the weight of everything she had just said, everything she had exposed. The facade had been broken. The audience could now see the cracks in the walls that had been so carefully built around Ellen's image. This wasn't just an interview. It wasn't just an exchange of words. This was a revelation. Ellen, who had spent years crafting the persona of the lovable, easygoing host, now found herself humbled in a way she had never expected. There was no quick-witted comeback, no flashy retort. All she could do was sit there, absorbing the truth, her eyes now softening as she considered what Jasmine had just revealed. Jasmine wasn't done. She had a final message, something she wanted to leave not just Ellen with, but the audience as well. "People like me," she said, her voice a little quieter now but no less powerful. "We don't get to be the face of a major TV show. We don't get invited on to talk about our lives, our struggles. We're the ones that get told to stay quiet, to stay out of the spotlight, because we make people uncomfortable. But I'm here to remind you that there's power in discomfort. There's power in confronting the things that scare us. And if you're not ready for that, if you're not ready to step into those uncomfortable spaces, then maybe you don't belong in this position to begin with." Ellen's gaze softened. She had heard these words, but they were landing in a way they never had before. She wasn't just hearing them because they were pointed at her. She was hearing them because they were universal. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just the host of her show. She was a person, sitting across from someone who had forced her to see the world from a completely different perspective. The applause started quietly at first, hesitant, but it quickly grew into a thunderous wave as the audience recognized the courage, the raw honesty, and the sheer strength it took for Jasmine to say those words, for her to be brave enough to speak them out loud in front of millions. Jasmine didn't flinch under the weight of the applause. She didn't need it. She wasn't here for validation. She had already won. Ellen, who had been holding back tears for most of the interview, finally let them slip. It wasn't about embarrassment, nor was it about shame. It was a realization. She had built her career on the idea of helping others, of being a platform for underrepresented voices. But in that moment, she understood that she hadn't done enough. She hadn't given enough space for people like Jasmine to speak freely, without fear of judgment. And it hurt her to realize that. The applause grew even louder, almost deafening now, as Jasmine gave a small, knowing smile. "Thank you, Ellen," she said softly, her voice unwavering. "Thank you for letting me speak my truth. I hope it makes you think. I hope it makes all of us think about the world we're building, the stories we're telling, and who gets to be part of them." Jasmine turned to the camera, her eyes focused now, not just on Ellen, but on the millions of people watching at home. "This isn't just about Ellen," she continued. "This is about all of us. It's about every person whose voice has been silenced, every story that's been ignored, every person who's ever been made to feel less than. We all have a part to play in making sure everyone gets heard, and we all have the responsibility to fight for the spaces where we can speak our truths." The applause reached its peak as the camera zoomed out, capturing the raw, unfiltered moment for all to see. Ellen sat back, the weight of it all sinking in. For the first time in her career, she wasn't the one in control of the narrative. She wasn't the one dictating the conversation. And for once, that was okay. Jasmine's message was clear, powerful, and undeniably necessary. It wasn't about winning a fight. It was about exposing the reality that many people choose to ignore. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just make an impact on Ellen. She made an impact on everyone watching, challenging them to think, to confront the discomfort, and to finally start listening.
Thank you for watching our channel, Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.